Evelyn was a beautiful, athletic woman. However, in the minds of many, the key word is was. For me, that's not the case. A bit of background about me. Rob Warfield is probably necessary to understand the rest of this story. Until I was around 14, I was a juvenile delinquent. I constantly got into fights because I was tough, bullied other kids, shoplifted, stole from locals, and once, along with a few older friends, even stole a car for a few hours. At 14, I was placed in foster care because my parents could no longer handle me. I know that many kids have terrible experiences in foster families. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for me. My foster parents were big, tough, businesslike people, and I had to stay in line. My foster father had played lacrosse in college, and one of my foster brothers, who was a year older than me, also played lacrosse. By working various odd jobs, I managed to save enough money to buy a lacrosse stick, and my foster parents pushed for me to join a lacrosse league. I trained regularly with my foster brother and father. It turned out that I grew to almost the ideal size for a lacrosse forward. Since I turned 18, I've stood exactly 186 centimeters, 6'0", barefoot, and weighed 88 kilograms, 194 pounds, without clothes. In short, by the time I was 18 and graduating from high school, I was good enough to earn a scholarship to a Big Ten school. I started for 3 years from sophomore to senior year as a forward in college, earned a degree in electrical engineering in 4 years, and received several attractive job offers upon graduation. I met my wife, Jasmine, a marketing specialist from an ACC school, shortly after she graduated. We got married when we were both 24 and enjoyed life as a highly mobile couple. Jasmine and I met Evelyn Simmons and her husband Brett when we moved to North Carolina at 26, seeking better job opportunities. Evelyn and Brett were 3 or 4 years older than Jasmine and me, and they were the most attractive couple we had ever seen. Women's looks are often exaggerated in stories, but in Evelyn's case, this was not an exaggeration. I genuinely believe that from the time we met her, and likely since she turned 18, Evelyn had never been in a room where she wasn't both the most beautiful and stunning woman there. I don't claim to be an expert on male appearance, but judging by women's reactions, Brett was nearly in the same league as Evelyn when it came to looks. Although I liked Evelyn, I admit she was initially a bit stiff, but she was clearly also kind and empathetic. Surprisingly, she was almost shy. Given her looks and the fact that she was genuinely smart, shyness was an unexpected quality. Along with Brett and Evelyn, we socially connected with several other couples around our age in North Carolina's Research Triangle area. These included Cindy and Dale, Sue and Rick, and Mandy and Carl. However, after we had lived in North Carolina for a few months, Jasmine and some of our other female friends seemed to change. It was as though they began to look down on Evelyn. I had trouble understanding why until I realized it was jealousy. I overheard a conversation in my kitchen between Jasmine and 2 of her friends. I was working on a project just outside the kitchen area of our home, and since it was a pleasant spring day, the windows were open. God Jazz. Jazz was the nickname given to my wife by her friends, though I never called her that. That woman Evelyn really freezes me out. Do you see how my husband drools every time he's around her? Cindy growled. She's the sexiest one around and always seems to flaunt her assets, added Sue. Rick and I had our biggest argument over her after he was even more obvious than Dale. Drooling over her like a lovesick puppy, Jasmine interjected. Rob's not as obvious, but like all the cavemen we're married to, I'm sure he stares at her from behind his omnipresent aviator sunglasses whenever he's around that woman. I'd love to throw that little temptress off her game, Cindy giggled, while Sue joined in laughing at the word temptress and sharing Cindy's amusement. Tearing Evelyn off her pedestal and calling her all sorts of names, which were both inaccurate and inappropriate, went on for at least 5 more minutes before I'd had enough. I loudly announced my presence, entering through the side door and walking into the kitchen, finally putting an end to the slander session, at least for the moment. "Oh, hi, Sue. Hi, Cindy," I smiled, pretending I had just arrived. "What's going on?" "Just a little girl talk." Jasmine smiled back graciously, allowing me to kiss her on the cheek. I chatted with them a bit, drank a bottle of iced tea, and then announced that I'd be doing some odd jobs right outside the kitchen windows. Shortly afterward, Sue and Cindy left, effectively ending the Bring Evelyn Down party. The way those three talked really got under my skin. It was especially upsetting because both Sue and Cindy had definitely come on to me in the past. I can easily tell the difference between flirting and outright advances, and theirs were unmistakably advances. Yet they called Evelyn, whom I had no reason to think was indiscriminate, a temptress. I was also troubled by Jasmine's attitude. She had changed since we moved to North Carolina, or perhaps her true self was coming out, as I had never seen this mean, snide side of her that I had observed over the past few months. In any case, every time our group of friends got together, the women never ostracized Evelyn in mixed gatherings, likely because of how attractive her husband Brett was. I tried to be as kind to Evelyn as possible to make up for the subtle ways in which the women avoided her. Evelyn never dressed provocatively. She simply possessed such natural beauty, allure, and poise that she couldn't hide it. We had been living in the Research Triangle area for about a year when tragedy struck. Evelyn was in a serious car accident and ended up with significant facial injuries, and her left leg had to be amputated below the knee. Even after months of plastic surgery and rehabilitation, she still didn't look quite the same, partly because the left side of her face was covered in scars that no plastic surgeon, however skilled, could fully remove. The saddest part was how the other women reacted to her misfortune. Although they seemed sympathetic in Evelyn's presence, they appeared almost joyful behind her back. I wouldn't have been surprised if at least Sue, Mandy, and Cindy, and I hoped not Jasmine, were pleased that the temptress Evelyn had been taken down a few notches. The way Evelyn was treated wasn't my only complaint. Jasmine had definitely changed, and by the time we had lived in North Carolina for about 18 months, I was liking Brett, Rick, Dale, and Carl less and less each time I interacted with them. They all played football at small colleges, Division III, and, for some reason, thought it was better than my playing lacrosse at a Big Ten school. I never tried to explain how naive that was. Athletes in conferences like the Big Ten are generally on a completely different level compared to Division III athletes. Jasmine seemed less affectionate than when we got married, far more snide, and increasingly concerned with material things. I talked to her about these changes, but she either explained that her ideas were just maturing, claimed I was imagining things, or suggested that I was becoming more sensitive. As for the guys in our group, I only socialized with them during events with our wives. I joined a recreational softball league, started taking tennis lessons, and formed another group of male friends with whom it was easier to get along. The first significant event happened about 3 months after Evelyn's accident. I had visited her in the hospital a few times, helped her connect with an excellent rehabilitation center, and she had been fitted with a prosthetic leg. I was out for a run in the local park when I passed a secluded grove with a few benches and heard what sounded like sobbing. I stopped my run, wondering if someone might be in trouble, and entered the grove. Evelyn was sitting on a bench, crying. I approached Evelyn, sat down beside her, and touched her hand before she even realized it was me. She flinched when I touched her, but when she saw it was me, she leaned her head on my shoulder and continued crying. I held her and simply let her cry for a few more minutes. After a few minutes, Evelyn regained most of her composure, looked at me, wiped away her tears, and said, "I'm sorry you had to witness my little pity party, Rob. I understand. You've been through a lot, Evelyn. If what happened to you had happened to me, it would take me a long time to come to terms with it. I feel like I shouldn't be so shallow and worried about how my appearance has changed, or that I can't do sports like I used to, or wear clothes that show off my legs, which I used to take vain pleasure in," she replied with a faint smile. "You're not shallow, but you seem resigned. You don't need to resign yourself. You can have just as good a life as before." "Not with this horrible scar on my face," Evelyn scoffed, turning her left side toward me, "or this artificial leg," she continued, tapping her left shin, which produced a metallic sound. "That's where you're wrong, Evelyn," I continued. "Maybe you're not in the 100th percentile for looks anymore like you used to be, but you're still not below the 99th. People with even greater need for prosthetics than you are capable of performing physical tasks just as well as anyone else." Evelyn looked puzzled. "Why do you say that when you damn well know it's not true? I look awful. At least Brett seems to think so." I smirked. She slapped my arm and cursed. "Not funny." "Yes, it is funny," I replied, "because you're a beautiful, stunning woman, one any man would be lucky to marry. And if Brett thinks otherwise, then he's the one who's shallow. After a long pause, she remarked, "You must be blind." "No, actually, I see very well. I'm lucky with my eyesight. I think you need a change in perspective. Here's what I propose. Why don't we meet twice a week to work on your mobility? I'll go with you anywhere you want to go, so if you run into any physical challenges or feel uncomfortable, I can help. Plus, maybe my attention will help you believe the truth, that you're a beautiful, stunning woman." Evelyn protested for a few minutes but eventually agreed. We started with a walk on the park trail, and when she got tired, I carried her the last 500 or so yards back to her car. We agreed to meet twice a week for about an hour to work on her mobility. After a while, I noticed she started wearing makeup again, trying to minimize the scars on the left side of her face. I made no attempt to hide my interactions with Evelyn from Jasmine. In fact, I invited her to join us, thinking that support from another woman might be helpful. Jasmine dismissively declined. I didn't like that. After about 6 weeks of our sessions, Evelyn's attitude and mobility had improved significantly. However, she had one serious concern. She mentioned that Brett was becoming more distant with each passing week, and she was certain he was having an affair. After one of our sessions, when she shared her suspicions about an affair, I sat her down and talked with her about it in detail. After our conversation, I wasn't convinced she was right, but since it was troubling her, and because we had become good friends, I offered to investigate for her. "When do you think he's most likely fooling around?" I asked. "It seems to vary, but it's almost always early on Saturday mornings. Would you mind if I temporarily disable his car one Saturday, set up an electronic tracker on your car, and make him use it instead? As an electrical engineer, I have access to all kinds of advanced electronics. I could easily find out if he was cheating. On Saturday afternoons, you'll call me this Friday night after making sure he won't need his car in the evening. You'll leave the side garage door open and I'll handle the rest." A broad smile appeared on her face and she kissed me on the cheek. I smiled back. The second significant event occurred when I put my plan into action. On Friday evening, after receiving Evelyn's coded message, "My prosthetic leg hurts tonight, got any suggestions?" I left the party Jasmine and I were attending, claiming I was going to get more ice for the host. I slipped into Evelyn's garage, temporarily shorted out a critical circuit in Brett's car's ignition system, and placed a magnetic tracker in the wheel well of Evelyn's car. The whole operation took me 4 minutes. I picked up some ice for the host and returned to the party. On Saturday, Jasmine was doing her usual shopping with either Sue or Cindy. I can't remember which, so I was free to monitor the tracker in Evelyn's car while working on some computer tasks at home. As soon as I saw Evelyn's car moving, I jumped into my own car and followed. Imagine my surprise when I found her parked in front of Mandy and Carl's house, right next to Jasmine's car. From conversations at a Friday night party, I knew Mandy was out of town. I parked a block away and quietly snuck around to the back of Mandy and Carl's house. I didn't see anyone on the first floor, but I could hear noises coming from upstairs. It was risky, but I tried the back door and found it unlocked. I took off my shoes, slipped inside, and crept upstairs. My surprise turned to anger when, in the master bedroom, I heard the sounds of sex and saw, on the same king-sized bed, Brett having sex with Jasmine and Carl with Sue. My immediate impulse, fueled by my past as a tough juvenile delinquent and my aggressive streak from playing lacrosse, was to burst in and beat the hell out of Brett. However, I knew I had illegally trespassed on Carl's property, so that would end badly for me. Instead, I took a few explicit photos on my smartphone. The angles weren't great, but with all 6 different photos, I think it was clear who the 4 participants were. Jasmine's face was unmistakable as she rode Brett cowgirl style, as was Sue's face as she did the same with Carl. One of the photos also had Brett's face very clearly visible. Carl's face wasn't as clear, as he was lying face down and was the farthest from me, but it was his bedroom, and anyone who knew him could tell it was him. After taking and quickly reviewing the photos, I crept back downstairs, put my shoes back on, and left. I had no doubt in my mind that the cheaters would swap partners after the first round. Just because I needed to do something, I deflated both of the rear tires on Jasmine's car, then drove to Evelyn's house. I don't think I had ever been this angry in my life. I was only able to control my emotions because, over the past few months, I'd begun feeling things I'd never experienced so intensely before. I called Evelyn on my way to her place, told her I wanted to talk, and asked her to get some drinks. She might need them for what I was about to reveal. I needed only a brief conversation with Evelyn. At first, she cried and said things like, "I know I'm now just a disfigured," she started, but I stopped her. "You don't deserve to be treated this way. Brett and Jasmine are jerks, just like Carl and Sue. I have a plan. Can we meet early next week after I sort out a few details?" "All right," she replied, wiping her tears. "You need to be as good an actress as possible for the next week or so to keep Brett in the dark. Can you do that?" Wiping away the last tear and giving her face a defiant look, Evelyn replied, "Yes, I can." I fixed Brett's car, then started working on my plans. I told Evelyn I'd message her about our meeting, probably Tuesday or Wednesday. "Thank you, Rob," Evelyn said with a small smile and kissed me on the cheek. Then I began my new life by pulling Evelyn close and planting the hottest kiss I'd ever given anyone on her lips, holding her tightly. Not only did she not resist, but she returned my passion with equal enthusiasm. When I pulled away, I smiled at her, went to the garage, removed the short circuit from Brett's car ignition system, and then drove home. I was proud of myself for behaving almost the same with Jasmine over the next few days. The only difference was that I didn't initiate any intimacy. Jasmine was surprised when she tried to start something, but I made an excuse, which she accepted since I had never lied to her before. The next few days kept me busy. I met Evelyn on Wednesday afternoon at a cafe in the building next to her workplace. I wasn't sure she'd fully agree, but with a few minor adjustments, she accepted everything I proposed. We parted with a kiss more passionate than either of us had ever experienced, and as I walked away, she had a smile on her face and a warm glow radiating from her heart. My plan was set to be fully executed within 3 weeks after that Wednesday meeting with Evelyn at the cafe. In the meantime, we continued our sessions twice a week, each time saying goodbye with a kiss rather than just a hug, as we had in the first few weeks. I did have to sleep with Jasmine to keep her from getting suspicious, but I just treated her like the shallow, selfish person she essentially was, and she seemed satisfied. Everything was going smoothly until 1 week before the final deadline. I couldn't resist adding a touch of bitterness to the sweetness. The third significant event happened on a Saturday evening, 1 week before my plan was set to be fully executed. It was a barbecue at Sue and Rick's house, with all the usual suspects present. I was glad this might be the last time I'd have to see any of the jerk husbands in our group. While the women were occupied elsewhere, the guys, except for me, as I wasn't drinking, were each on their 6th or 7th beer, swapping lies in the backyard. To my shock, though looking back I shouldn't have been surprised given Brett's demonstrated disrespect toward Evelyn. Brett made a degrading comment about Evelyn, referencing both her ugly scar and her metal leg. I couldn't hold back my anger. "Why are you such a damn jerk?" I growled. "How dare you talk about your wife like that?" I added a few more choice words, some of which implied he had an unusual relationship with his mother. To my delight, a stunned Brett did something truly foolish. I think his reaction was fueled by 7 bottles of beer, his naive belief that playing Division III football somehow made him stronger than me, a lacrosse player in a major conference, along with the presence of the other guys and his jerkish nature in general. As he approached me with clenched fists, he growled, "I'll say whatever I want about my wife, you wimp, and I'll mess up and scar your face too." When his face was about half a meter from mine, I headbutted him in the nose, breaking it and knocking him to the ground, where he lay groaning and gasping. My satisfaction grew when Carl, apparently fueled by the same foolishness that spurred Brett, took a swing at me. I grabbed Carl's right fist with my left hand, stopping his drunken punch in midair. In the same motion, I kicked his left knee with my right foot, and as he fell to the ground, I stepped over his right arm and broke it. Dale looked like he wanted to do something, but I pointed at him and growled, "Don't even think about it." Rick leaned over the groaning, writhing Brett and asked, "Why did you do that?" "Don't worry too much, Rick. Brett and Carl have been sleeping with your wife Sue, apparently for quite some time. I'll send you the photos in the next few days." At that moment, the women ran over, all except Evelyn, who stayed in the background with a smile on her face. Since I couldn't avoid getting myself covered in Brett's blood, and since both he and Carl were screaming in pain while I stood there with a wild look in my eyes, Jasmine snapped, "What did you do, Rob?" I replied calmly, Your lovers attacked me, so I beat the crap out of them. Luckily for you and Sue, I didn't crush a few other things as well. As I walked to my car, Jasmine and Sue yelled at me. I ignored them. I was surprised that Jasmine came home. I was already in bed when she did. She turned on the overhead light in our room and started to rant. Not that you care, but both Carl and Brett had to go to the hospital. Brett has a broken nose and a concussion, and Carl has a broken arm and a bruised knee. Jasmine didn't expect my response. Turn off the light, you damn adulteress, and get out of my room. Go sleep in the guest room. After the initial shock, she snapped, you can't talk to me like that. That was all she could manage. I got up from the bed, looked her in the face, and said, if you don't get the hell out of here, I'll throw you out without your keys, and you can spend the night outside, or take care of your buddies. I don't care. She began to stammer. What? Do you mean? Clearly, my previous words hadn't sunk in. Maybe she was drunk, but I didn't let her finish. I carefully lifted her, carried her out of the room, closed and locked the door, and slid our security bar under the doorknob. Jasmine pounded on the door for about 5 minutes, but I turned on our white noise machine to drown out the sound, and within 10 minutes, I was in dreamland. On Sunday morning, I called Evelyn and asked if she'd mind speeding up our getaway. I have something to take care of on Monday, but any time after that works for me. I'll have the server set up for processing by Tuesday and arrange for the movers to come that day while Brett and Jasmine are at work. I replied happily. Jasmine tried to talk to me on Sunday and Monday. I pushed her off, saying we could talk Wednesday morning, but not before. She still attempted to engage me, but I simply walked away. I didn't share any meals with her and didn't interact with her at all until Tuesday. After Jasmine left for work on Tuesday morning, the movers arrived at our house. They loaded up everything I wanted to keep into the van. Then, after confirming Brett had left, I followed them to Evelyn's house, where we loaded up all the items she wanted to take from her home. As the movers were finishing up, a guy we hired to drive Evelyn's car to Austin, Texas, showed up, and we handed him the keys and instructions. Once the movers and the driver were taken care of, I called and arranged for Brett and Jasmine to be served at their offices. At the same time, I sent the photos of the cheaters from my phone to Rick, Mandy, Brett, and Jasmine. Then Evelyn and I shared a passionate kiss and got into my car. As soon as we left the Research Triangle area, Evelyn smirked. I can't believe I'm starting a new life with a new job in a new city with a guy I've never even slept with. That last part will be taken care of when we stop near Atlanta tonight. You know damn well it's going to be amazing because I love and respect you, and you feel the same about me. I grinned. Evelyn laughed, kissed me on the cheek, and then began chatting about our new life and the temporary housing in Austin near our new jobs until we could find a house we loved. That night, I learned a few things. I can't say they were unexpected, but I was certainly glad to get confirmation. Evelyn's facial scar and the loss of her leg below the left knee had no effect on our sexual enjoyment. She could maneuver her body into practically any position that brought pleasure, and her full round breasts were enticing. When you're truly in love with someone and leaving a bad situation, sex brings as much emotional satisfaction as it does physical. Starting a new life with Evelyn was probably the best decision I've ever made, perhaps second only to turning my life around in foster care after my juvenile delinquency phase. Both Brett and Jasmine tried calling us several times. We only answered their first calls, during which we simply told them that all communication would need to go through our lawyer. Evelyn and I had obviously hired the same one. We had already split all cash and securities. We held 50-50ths with our future ex-spouses and were prepared to either sell our homes or offer them the chance to buy us out. Rick and Mandy also called us, asking for further clarification about the photos I'd sent them. I provided additional explanations, as well as the name of the lawyer Evelyn and I were working with. We never found out what they did with that information. 7 years after our move to Austin, I consider my life with Evelyn perfect. She now has 3 different prosthetics for various situations, including one that allows her to jog easily while we push our 2 kids in strollers. At first, she was self-conscious about appearing in public in anything but long pants, but I convinced her that even with the prosthetic, her legs were stunning. Now she wears shorts or skirts without a second thought. We tell each other, I love you every day, and we mean it wholeheartedly. We have no idea what Brett and Jasmine are up to, nor do we care in the slightest. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.